Welcome back to our course on PSE 15. So far, virtually everything on the course has related to photographic images, although we have drawn and painted a few things and filled some spaces with paint. But for the next few sections, we're going to concentrate on drawing and painting. Sometimes you may draw and paint in association with images, so perhaps to add something to an image or to add an explanation to an image. Sometimes you may want to draw and paint using PSE 15 for its own sake and perhaps save a drawn or painted image. But whatever the reason for needing to draw or paint with PSE 15, we're going to cover the basics in this and the next few sections. Let's start with a brand new image. We're going to do Control N to create a new image. We're going to use a white background. I'm going to use the size that's my current default there. Click on OK. I have a white image to work on. Let's start by just brushing onto this sheet of white paper. In the Draw group, top left hand corner, we have the brushes. There are basically three. There's the brush, the Impressionist brush, and the Color Replacement tool. Now I'm sure you know what the Color Replacement tool is. Let's just use a standard brush. With the brush, the first set of options we have are the style of brush. I'll come to that in just a moment. We then have the brush size that we've talked about quite a bit. You can adjust with the slider or using the square bracket keyboard shortcut. And then we have the opacity of the brush. Note that the color that the brush is going to paint is my foreground color. So let me change my foreground color first of all to a nice blue color. And let me brush on this sheet of paper. That's a 65 pixel brush stroke. Let's try a bigger brush stroke. It's as straightforward as that. So far, when we've been using a brush, I've almost without exception used one of the default brushes. Now let's try some different options. What about a calligraphic brush? When I choose a category of brush, I'm then offered a number of options. And generally speaking, each option is described both in terms of the specific type of brush and in the size. So, for instance, this is a flat 7 pixel brush. If I go further down the calligraphic options, this is an oval 20 pixel and so on. As I'm sure you can imagine, with this many brush styles, and in each case many different sizes and types, there are a lot of different brushes in PSE 15, and if you are interested in doing any kind of brushwork in PSE 15, I suggest you spend some time going through the different options and identifying what's available. Let's just look at a couple of specific examples. Let's stick with the calligraphic ones for a moment. Let's go for, say, this one. In fact, with that one, what I think I'll do is I'll increase the size quite a bit, just to make the effect a little bit more noticeable. You notice what a sharp edge you get with those calligraphic brushes compared to the softer edges of the rounded brushes. And there are some much more extreme options than this, of course. So you might go for a drop shadow brush like this one in pretty big style, pretty big size. Or even at another extreme, what about a special effect brush? What about a brush with butterflies? So given all those different styles of brush, different sizes, different opacities, there are many options there, and I do suggest you spend some time taking a look at what's available. So given that very wide range of brushes that are available, let's look at the other settings for brush. First of all, blending mode. Well, you know about blending modes now, and again, it's a good idea to spend some time just experimenting with blending mode. Bear in mind that generally speaking you'll need a non-white base color to get the effect of some of the blends, but given that you know how to change the background color and the foreground color, you should be able to have some pretty good experiments with the things that you can do simply with brushes in order to achieve some of those blending effects. The next set of settings are the brush settings. And there's a very good section in the Elements PDF explaining all of these settings. I'm not going to go through them now. These are much more specialized to being able to draw and paint in PSE 15. And topics like hue, jitter and roundness and spacing and scatter and so on, very important when you're drawing in PSE 15, but I do suggest you work through the PDF on those and experiment with the appropriate brushes, settings, etc. The final set of options here relate to tablet settings. If you use a pressure sensitive tablet, then these settings may well be important to you. Again, I'm not covering these here because the use of tablets, those pressure sensitive type of tablets and pads, is not very commonplace, and I'll refer you to the section of the PDF called Set Up Pressure Sensitive Tablet Support, which in particular goes through the setup on Wacom tablets. I've just got a couple of other things to tell you about now in relation to brushes. One of them is that with certain types of brush, let me choose one of the wet media brushes. Let's try that one, and I'll make it quite a large brush on this occasion. If I draw with that, that's fine. If I switch to the airbrush though, although if I draw with it, it pretty much looks the same. If I select the airbrush mode and then just click and hold, the airbrush brushes anyway is simulating the action of an airbrush. And if I keep the mouse cursor in one position, you see that it's filling the space, the point that I've clicked on, centered around there with the paint or ink, however you want to think of it. I can then move across as normal, stop somewhere, and again I get that airbrush effect of the space being filled. So if you want to airbrush an area and vary the intensity of the airbrushing, that's the airbrush technique. And then one other thing to look at here, that's the Impressionist brush. This doesn't really apply colour. What it does is to distort existing colour to make it look as though the photo, or whatever it is that you're using this over, has been done using an Impressionist approach. So let me go back to this picture of Rievaulx Abbey. Let me just zoom in on this a little. Now let me switch to the Impressionist brush. I'm going to keep the opacity here fairly low and the size of the brush quite small. I'm just going to brush over an area roughly around the middle of this wall with the Impressionist brush. And that's the effect of what is described as the Impressionist brush. I think if you keep the settings fairly low, the size and the opacity, then you can get a fairly Impressionist sort of effect. It's another one to experiment with. That's it on brushes. I'll see you in the next section.